Is it Nicholas or is it Alec? What mic number do you guys have?
Two. Me and Bob. I turn mine off. So
Okay.
do a work session of Mount Crescent Town Council. So the topic.
Did you turn your mic back on?
The topic for our work session is housing, generally. So I'll leave it at that.
Okay. Good evening or good afternoon, councilors, Mr. Mayor. A while back, we had some issues with deed restricted units and HOA fees. And so staff said they would provide at a later work session information on the number of deed restricted units in the town and an analysis of the types of deed restrictions by category and a review of HOA fees and assessments. Did provide a lot of data within the staff report. That would be to do a summation, a lot of that information. And then questions. The kind of the work session is to have some dialogue. So let's talk about deed restricted units. Currently, there are 97 units in Mount Crescent View. We're going to break them into categories. Staff went back and took a look at them specifically by AMI percent. So within the no AMI percent category of deed restricted units, there are 54 units that have no AMI restrictions on them. 19 of those are deed restricted, and 35 of them are covenant restricted through either the condo or townhome declarations or covenants. A lot of those the early 2000s. Secondly, the 20% under AMI, which is really low threshold. There are 5 units in the town, those being in Homestead and Pittsburgh. And then the standard category 2, 81% to 120% AMI. There are 18 units in the town. Those are scattered between Pittsburgh, Homestead, 3 Seasons, and 1 in Mount December. In addition, we took a look at the Homestead Phase 2. That was the development this year that brought 22 units online. 20 of those are ownership units that have resale caps between 100 and 160% AMI. And the town retained 2 units for the town employee rentals. In addition, staff looked at how many rentals we have in town. There are 40 units restricted to rentals, and 8 of those units allow either owner occupancy or rental to employees with qualifications. And then in addition, we also took a look at how many town-owned units the town currently has, and there are 5 units that the town holds for employee housing. So this is a good place to stop and see if there are any questions just on the categories of deed restrictions or deed restrictions in general that the town has.
I just want to thank you for putting this together.
Okay. Well, the next step of the review was to take a look at HOA fees and affordability of deed restricted. Staff has been on an annual or at least recurring basis surveying homeowners associations that include restricted units to get a handle on HOA fees, which includes taxes and insurance. So I've provided a chart in the staff report that identifies some samples from different developments in town and different, particularly in Pitchfork, there's a little variability within Pitchfork depending upon the sub-association that you're in. But the average monthly cost surveyed in 2024 with monthly units, which would include the HOA fees and taxes and insurance, averaged about $581 per unit. Now, those have a range from 295 in Pitchfork to the units in Three Seasons that are deed restricted, but that's $920. So you can see there's quite a range of HOA fees within the community. Let's take a look. I just identified between those sampled units what the fee increases were between 2021 and 2024. And those fees have increased in range from 20 to 65%. So certainly HOA fees are one of a key topic. We certainly want to address it at the housing retreat because it is having a significant impact on the affordability of AMI deed restricted units. Even if the owner that purchased it was able to afford the AMI percentage mortgage, and they're slowly getting priced out by increases in HOA fees and assessment. So some key implications associated with just HOA fees and special assessments. They do threaten the long-term affordability of deed restricted units. Unfortunately, the town cannot regulate HOA dues for existing developments, and I think we'll continue to monitor that and track the yearly HOA fee trends and communicate that with council. The next part of this report had to do with market HOA fees. Try and get an idea of what the HOA fees are in a lot of the units that are developments that have the rentals, because that has an impact on the increased HOA fees. Typically, those increases are passed down to the renters. So this is another factor that has significant impact on affordability and with rental. We have fully priced rental units. So we did contact several of the town management companies. The only one that did provide information was Mountain Home Management, and the report Exhibit B gave a pretty good idea of 4 condominium complexes in the community. Kind of a representative sample of 102 units. What the outcome of that was that HOA fees in the market units have increased significantly across all those associations from 2021 to 2024, mainly due to rising taxes, insurance, and escalating reserve contributions. Special assessments are having a major impact with increases in the range of 20 to 60%. And again, those increases impact the rents of deed restricted rental units, as those increased costs are typically passed along to the renters. Another stopping point to ask any questions. And then have a special guest present today with Erin Ganza from the town Presbyterian Housing Director for the town. And she's going to talk about affordability within the market units. And we'll wrap up that portion. So,
Hey, Neal, maybe before we go into we dive into the HOA fee portion, I'd like to go back just a couple steps and check for one point that I'm not seeing highlighted here, and that is local employment requirements and what currently the established local employment requirements are for deed restricted units beyond AMI requirements. Yeah, because that's another topic beyond HOA, and it looks like the rest of the agenda is more HOA focused.
Okay, we didn't feel, so I didn't realize that would be something you'd ask. That's in the community housing guidelines that I think we circulated earlier this summer. But we can go through that, sure. So you have to be a resident in Gunnison County for at least a year prior to your qualifying for the unit. You have to make 80% of your income, earned income in Gunnison County. That's it.
Yeah, so I think what's coming up a lot is that definition of working in the community is so gray now, you know, and being on the Gunnison Valley Regional Housing Authority Board is whether your paycheck is like coming to you directly, if you're a contract hire, if your contract is like out of the community, then, you know, it all of a sudden you don't qualify if you're doing the exact same job and you're serving the exact same people. Just, and so I think that's kind of a bigger question of, are we serving the communities that we want to serve with the current guidelines? Through our deed restrictions. So, because that's the market, the employment market has shifted. And so I'd love to open it up and talk about what that looks like and, yeah, how we can address it.
What's the example that you're talking about?
So for example, on one of the appeals that we faced was somebody that basically, they were working for themselves, and so they qualified as essentially making 80% of their income in the county, even though they were working, on contracts to serve people outside of their community. And then all of a sudden they got hired by a firm doing the exact same job, but now the firm is actually based out of the county. And so even though they're doing the exact same job, making the exact same income, they don't qualify anymore. And so I feel like it's super gray.
What's great about that one?
Of the fact that they're not serving the community in the first place that they qualify. And so who do we want to serve? You know, like, do we, if that is clearly serving people in the community, serving the business community, that's one thing, but there's people that, and I'm not trying to restrict who we're serving, but I want to acknowledge the fact that you can be doing the exact same job and one structure of employment will qualify you and one will not. And so in that particular scenario, he went with the contract hire because he got benefits, he got better benefits. And so, but all of a sudden his housing was, you know, so I'm raising it for discussion, not to say that I've got an answer.
But that he shouldn't have qualified when he was working for himself, or is the thought that he should qualify working with a paycheck coming from Ohio?
I think that's what I'm opening up to discuss, because what I don't love is I don't see how that one person, for example, is serving the community getting better or worse in either scenario. And therefore, why should they qualify if they're working for themselves, you know, versus not?
Gotcha.
Yeah.
That is just the question that I had to that is, and I don't have the answer. I'm not expecting you to have the answer, but maybe you expect the board. I'm curious on how the individual qualified in the first place if they did not serve locally.
Yeah. Work for themselves, right? Like somebody working for.
Well, you can be self-employed, but you still have to serve locally. So I'm again just curious on how that person was eligible if they work for themselves, but their clientele was exclusively outside of the valley, or even beyond the 80% part of it. Because to me, that is remote work.
Yeah.
And to me, our programs are not intended to support those that work remotely.
Yeah, and if that's not intended, then how are we tracking that? And I don't.
Well, the compliance is how you track it, essentially, right?
Which has admittedly been lacking up to this
Yeah.
year, yeah.
Because there's also that aspect of somebody who maybe they started a business and most of their business happens inside the valley and their business grows and now most of their business is outside.
Right, they're kind of. So, yeah.
That is the change.
But in that scenario, what do you think should happen?
I would mostly love to not make working for yourself or working for a, external contractor, an external contract, or consulting firm or, to not make that the limiter. Yeah, that, I want to get to the root of who we are trying to serve and make sure that our guidelines actually capture that in a way that is like traceable and aligns with our drive of who we're trying to create this housing for.
And I think the limiter is working in the valley or getting your income from the valley, not your form.
I don't think that's necessarily how I track it, but,
That is how.
okay.
Well, the level of tracking, level of enforcement is this most, if not all, this board knows, has been, at least on the ownership, has been lacking in the town. Historically has looked towards the housing authority to do that enforcement for it. And historically, it was an occasional flyer or, little thing in the mail. And, if you signed it and returned it, great. Didn't, there wasn't really much of a follow-up. So wasn't really, and that's in contrast to rentals, which we handled in-house as recently as 2023. And community development handled that and it was, pretty thorough. And I think we got, I don't remember what the number, but a high response rate and a high compliance rate. So one of the initiatives in the new IGA housing authority that we entered into in either at the end of last year or the beginning of this year had a strong piece of compliance attached to it. And we were the first beneficiary, guinea pig, however you want to look at it, for that program with Pitchfork. And that's where we've identified some of these things. And so I'll go back to what I said originally. I would argue that through the compliance process, that if an individual, self-employed or, contracted or W-2 employee, to me, that doesn't matter. You can be any of the three and still qualify, provided those services that you provide are earned and serve the community. And I know that's a little vague too, right there. Or what is earned in the community. But that's some of the challenges, but I think if you really dive into it, it might be a little more straightforward than it seems on the surface. But there's always going to be a unique thing that sometimes leaves you scratching or asking more questions.
And one of the things, and I want to find it, but I believe it actually calls out in our housing guidelines that we will not check the source of income after initial application. We will only check AMI, and that's in our own housing guidelines. So that's also where I was like, wow, and I don't believe that's even how Denison Valley Regional Housing Authority was proceeding with their compliance process this time around. So, that's a disconnect and something that I think we should, clean up to really indicate what we plan to do and how we plan to enforce and how we plan to serve that we want to serve.
One of the suggested topics for evaluation and updating by the consultant as part of the 5-year or whatever it turns out to be strategic housing plan is update 2020 housing guidelines.
Roman?
Well, another way of But this is what I've seen from talking to some folks is there's this perception of people being um, sort of dinged for their life changing after the fact after they get into housing, and uh, this perception of they put their time in, so they're local enough no matter what happens to their situation. And an example that I was given is like a guide. They start here, they make their money here, they start doing some work elsewhere, then they secure maybe something a little bit more longer term, but it pushes them out of that 80% category. But they still come back here and spend a lot of time here. And the argument is, well, they put their time in, they're in the community, they're spending their money here. And that's the justification. But if somebody came in with that restriction or that's how they made their money, we'd be like, no way, that's a hard no. But then somehow there's this argument down the road that because things change, it doesn't necessarily matter because they then cemented themselves here. So it's more of a philosophical conversation than a retreat.
And I think contrasting the person who's been here and have gone through those changes versus someone coming in. I work for Sun Microsystems out of San Francisco, and that's where they actually want to live here and live in restricted housing. So
Yeah, I just, that starts to feel like advocating for somebody versus somebody that you don't. We gotta clean up our own guidelines that are black and white.
Yeah, and I think where I was going with that
Yeah.
is like using that argument of there's gotta be some rules in which to just establish and go by.
Yeah.
I was gonna say, I didn't think that was a philosophical discussion or topic. I think someone is using housing that could be better used by someone who truly puts in the community. And we need to address that.
And I'm not arguing for this
I didn't
perception,
think
it's
you
just
were-
that's the argument. It seems like it comes back to like, well, it doesn't matter after the fact because someone's here and you know people and they're local enough and whatever happens that's that.
Neal, can I ask you a question? I was really surprised when I read this report that I always thought they had to have an AMI income range, and I was surprised by the number that don't have any limit on the income of the affordable units. And a lot of rental is rental based on income. How do you determine what the rents are based on?
Well,
I
since it,
didn't really see that.
yeah, it's mainly because a lot of those have no AMI percent range. They're all developed. Big chunk of them is 35 of them as a part of a either condominium or townhome covenants or declarations. And they were set aside typically for an employee or a manager who worked for the association. And so they provided housing as part of that. And so there's no AMI, but there is a residency requirement that I saw in all of them.
As a part of that, that makes a lot of sense. So how do we determine
It's market rent. I'm
this
assuming.
market rate?
you can't qualify as,
You have to be an employee in the county,
so
but
the market is
No.
qualified employees in the county.
And then I didn't understand, like on page 9, there's the unit can Oak Ridge. What's a rental owner? You know, usually they're an owner or a rental and it's, what's a rental owner?
well, there was a division between whether you could, as an owner, occupy the residence. And I think there's about 8 of them articulated that you can purchase a unit, you're able to live in that unit, or you can. Well, if those set aside ones for employee units that are not intended, they're typically owned by the development homeowners association.
And it's not interesting to put something that you can't live.
Wow. be rented to an employee of the, like a condo.
Right, yeah, providing housing for locals. Along their employees.
You know, I was noticing in the HOA use spreadsheet header that the insurance is the same for everyone. Curious about that.
I think that was, I'd have to. You put this together a while back. I don't know if that was just a standard that we took into consideration probably for a monthly increase.
And these are all separate columns, right? They're not included. I mean, the total is the total, but the other three, HOA dues, taxes, and insurance, those are all individual. None of those are cumulative and incorporate something else.
Correct.
One other question, the special assessment can be recouped on sale, correct?
There can be limitations upon the types. I think that's something that maybe Aaron will speak to.
Can't wait to hear about it. What a great segue.
Mayor, council, thanks for having me.
May I just really quickly, additional point or comment to Bobby's question on top of what Neal said. A lot of our chapter 22, our community housing chapter was created in early 2000, 2001, 2002. So it proceeds a lot of the rental units that were governed and created under a specific article in chapter 21 zoning. And I think it's fair to say that that particular article is not as well developed as chapter 22 was. And so that's why some of those rental units are less, have less restrictions associated with them.
Is that article that is the housing guidelines or?
No, if you wanted to see what governs at the time, you go to chapter 21 and there's a community housing article. Thank you. So anything that was created before the guidelines came, or the creation of chapter 22, which was the early 2000s, is and was subject to that article.
I'll just give kind of like a high level HOA fixed income project pitch, wrong word. And then you can ask questions in terms of how, see kind of what your concerns were with the resident that came presented their situation. Mixed income properties like this, where you've got like a portion of them that are deed restricted versus the majority that are market rate, are really difficult to manage. And the reason is because HOAs have a life and numbers count. And so if you've got 20 units and 4 of them are deed restricted, you've got 16 people that can outvote those 4 for a hot tub or landscaping or cool Christmas decorations, whatever it is. And so there will always be a tension because affordable owners really can't realize in all of those improvements, but the market rate owners have lived in our culture steeped in fix and flip. And so that's where they're going to go. They're going to try to maximize their investment, which is totally normal for the meeting. But those deed restricted units are caught up in that construct of the HOA. And so then you see special assessments. And sometimes, you know, it's for absolutely valid things. We see plenty of HOAs that are unhealthy, you know, that did not put away reserves, that have not replaced roofs, windows, kept up with things. And then you get a giant special assessment and it's tough. You know, that happens whether you're market rate or not. You know, that HOAs have not consistently been held to a kind of a statutorily to a level of management that keeps buildings longevity in mind. And so you've got a component that there's no control of guarantee of quality and longevity. And you have market driven owners that most of the time outweigh the hurts of the affordable. And so it's just a perfect storm there. It's really difficult. And so, yes, usually write in that special assessments can be recouped. But if you have an income restriction on that unit, the AMI is at 100%, just keep leaping on these costs and drive it up. Eventually get to some of the things that we've seen listed lately with the housing authority, where the price point and the income limit do not match. And so who bears the brunt in that situation? What happens to that unit? what role does it play in your affordable housing portfolio with the video units that you guys control as a benefactor? And it's a challenging space. You know, some of it is that, well, you're just gonna have to sell it for less. And you tell that to an affordable owner that's only been allocated 3% appreciation over time and has been taking out, scraping together loans to try to make up for those special assessments. And so it's a really upside down space for these affordable owners. I think in a perfect world, you know, like, is there a way that you can sequester those units so they're in their own building and they have kind of their own mini HOA with a lot of different structures? But I think recognizing how complicated it is, my preference is to simply not mix and mingle unless you've got a really good development plan and you're starting from scratch, knowing this going, knowing that this tension exists. When you've got an existing problem, you've got to look at it through a different lens, because we can't really do anything to the HOA to make them stop increasing things or pursuing amenity rich. And so that's kind of a different topic, but we'll get to that one. And so with HOAs, some things that I think are right off the bat is like, we really have no control. And so when I've seen these play well, often a public housing agency or a development fund or a public entity will somehow be involved in the HOA. And say, because I was the developer, I am written into the covenants and I am part of this. We will seed HOA funds to get this started. We'll be a voting member and try to keep things on track. That works. I worked for a small nonprofit, I guess it wasn't that small, a nationwide nonprofit that when it did for sale housing in a condominium space, like Mercy Housing always had a seat at the HOA to try to keep things on track. But those were fully deed-restricted projects. You know, and so you can really control them that way because everybody's gunning for the same thing. Keeping them affordable, safe place to live, it's a nest, not a nest. But in the rest of the world, we don't control HOAs. Often condominium developments really make their bank of like, get in early, get in at this low price. You don't remember all those common charges that are coming your way eventually. And it just, because it's a group conversation and a communal expense, it's just harder. You know, like, you know when your roof is going and you got to pay attention to it and it's coming and you plan for it. Or you don't, you figure out when it happens and it happens to other people. But when it's a group of people trying to figure out the common things, it's more people. Things that we've seen in a few of the condominium developments that we touch in town are that insurance prices are going through the roof. And maybe you guys are experiencing that on your own properties. And if we own half of a duplex in HOA, in an HOA in City South. And we've been dropped 4 times in the past, I guess it'd be 2 years since the troublesome fire, is that right? Years. And our prices double. You know, and so those costs we see, if you look at any newspaper story in the finance section, there'll be something about insurance and the cost of the burden. So some of these things are just leaving, like, we know we have to pay attention to them.
Can I ask a clarification?
Yeah.
When you first started talking, you suggested not mingling deed restricted units in a building or association
With market rate.
with market.
Yeah, unless you've got a program to address it, because things are gonna go sideways, you know, and so, a lot of those exist. They exist all over the place because we'll write inclusionary zoning ordinances that say thou shalt provide a unit. If you're gonna build 30, you need to do 1, whether it's on site or elsewhere. And I would honestly, like, looking at it through the lens of town, like, looking forward at how you do your policies is where you're gonna get the most traction. Like, if you have a developer that has an off-site requirement or an inclusionary zoning requirement that they're building 100 units and they have to build 5 affordable ones, like, make sure that the conversation of how those 5 are managed and how they're subject to a different component of the HOA or simply built separately. And that conflicts with fair housing, which is a bummer. You know, like, a lot of the best ideas are illegal in affordable housing. It's an unfortunate space. But when we look at it from the eyes of affordable housing, they're like, ooh, mix them in. So no one knows which unit is which and everybody kind of has the same access.
Inclusionary zoning.
Super laudable, like, you want that. But then when it comes down to HOA legal structure and who can assess and vote on and win improvements, communities that may not serve for housing people the same way they would go to a housing owner, it's a tough space. And so I think by practice, it's better to try to keep them separate. And definitely look when they can purchase something off-site that exists, need to do a really good assessment of the project that they're choosing to buy a unit in. To say, oh, here's an affordable housing unit, we'll buy it off the market. We'll put a deed restriction on it, and I met my requirements for inclusionary housing. Like, make sure it's healthy, make sure it's not super old, make sure that their HOA board is ran well. Like, these are all things that you want to consider and make sure it's not creating a problem down the line when they're meeting their housing requirement, but maybe not.
This one point, I think that creates a difficulty when you're trying to integrate housing mix within a development, because it seems like you're segregating
That's
the
the fair housing
development.
concern. Yeah,
And I think there are, talking about it after we're done, but there are ways to try and address that. Deed restrictions, I think you can, to protect the deed restricted units from substantial escalating increases in HOA fees and special assessments, you write it into the deed restriction, either on a pro rata basis, based on bedrooms, square footage, whatever is appropriate for that development. And you require the developer to set aside additional reserve deposits, or they're contributed to the reserves that help that deed restricted unit maintain some equity with the market.
that's certainly an option.
So you're allowed to do that. It's part of the negotiation of the front end of
Part of the development agreement.
for new.
And we've actually written deed restriction templates based upon that model. We're just waiting for the development to come forward so that we can apply. So,
And by doing, usually the affordable units are smaller, you know, like you're
Yeah,
doing the
oh,
requirement you're
absolutely.
putting in there. And so then you at least have that kind of pro rata amount of the 750 square foot unit is going to pay lower fees than a 3-bedroom, 2,000 square foot unit.
but then you have more of an integrated mix of community with those income levels, which I think is a much better idea than just segregating.
So yes and
Deed
no.
restricted over here, and these are all free market.
And I think also writing into that is an awareness of amenity rich pursuits of the HOA.
We also tackle the special assessments.
All of that needs to be addressed when you have the conversation up front with the developer of recognizing this unit can't respond the way that all the other units can. Most of these homeowners cannot access lines of credit because their appreciation caps don't grow fast enough for them to gain equity where they can borrow $25,000 to pay for a special assessment. So like roofs and windows and doors and exterior, yes, you hope so. Hot tubs, landscaping, golf courses, like those kind of things, like making sure that you're drawing attention in your development agreement. These cannot be burdened in the same way that a market rate.
Sounds like a modification of, yeah, crap doing.
I'm not kidding, right? Seriously.
Nothing to kid about.
So like a separate housing calculator for assessment.
But you can't go back and try to fix this. You have to work upfront for everything that's coming online. Yeah, is that pretty? Yeah, so you can certainly, like, the policy discussion is actually sunshine and rainbows, right? That you can come up with really good tangible solutions. Know that the problems are lurking, but you have your eye on them. Looking back is a little bit harder. You have to be a little more creative because the likelihood of actually changing the covenants or in HOA is slow to know.
Not that it can't be done, but
Can be done.
if we can't do it just ourselves, we have to have the HOA sign off on it.
Everybody's got to agree.
Yeah, and that's all. Especially when you're then saying you market rate owners may be shouldering more of this burden than this one unit. And it's just, it is what it is.
We don't get to use the hot tub.
You don't get to come to the hot tub and we're gonna watch. Yeah. You're gonna think all those things.
So there's a pro-rata, you know, situation in the HOA. Can we do that based off of the unit's cost?
I think you could probably set standards. I would definitely check with your attorney, you know, make sure this is a defensible way of doing it. Square footage is one way. I think valuation at certificate of occupancy or at building permits is also pretty defensible sounding to me. I'm not an attorney, I agree now and then. But making sure that you're identifying, then you're capturing also the value of the finishes, which is a great way to kind of differentiate as well.
Can we do value, at last appraisal by the county? Would that be a thing?
You're looking backwards then, right? Because the project exists for the valuation to have been in place. So when you're placing, meaning when you're placing a unit, is that what you're saying? Like when someone's purchasing a unit?
So a whole unit has been built, and you've got, say, 8 units that are market rate and they all sell for $1 million. And you've got, 2 that are not market rate and they sell for $100,000. Can those guys then pay 1/10 the HOA fees of the other?
I think it's absolutely worth trying.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying it hasn't been done. I don't know if it's been done. I know that people are trying to skin this cat 100 ways since yesterday. And so square footage is one way, but I think you'd see a much bigger departure or a bigger delta in those values of the market rate to the affordable if you did it based on building costs.
Or later on, as they sell,
Assessment.
or assessments come around, but,
Yeah,
2 years later, this one went up 20% because it's market rate. And this one went up 3% because that's all the farther.
and it
goes.
resets
Yeah.
with that calculation. Yeah, I like that.
I think that's an awesome way to kind of be. I'm curious how we can navigate that without creating an undue burden on the association to do a valuation or assessment of value of property.
He's talking like the assessor's office.
The assessor's office does it.
Like the county's
Oh,
valuation.
like their version of the value.
Yeah, like when they, do our taxes every 10 years,
Thanks.
use that number.
Just in proportion.
Yeah, and couple that with excess reserves or expert reserves in place, because you know that departure is gonna happen. That you're gonna see market rate increases of much higher. And so eventually it's gonna become really awkward after a while in terms of that discrepancy, but it's consistent with what the purpose of the affordable housing was.
Isn't that effectively what you're using as property tax at that point?
As an industry, yeah.
Because that's what the valuation ultimately.
Or
But
to
if
a
it
lesser
has-
extent, you can use actual sales prices with those.
Right.
And if it has the appreciation cap, we feed that data to the assessor every June. And say, of our appreciation cap units, here's the updated calculation. So we also capture people's capital improvements and things like that. Because we do know they sometimes ballpark stuff that's not spot on, like the example that you shared. And it even happens when we feed it to them. Like we have fewer errors in our community. And I think it's just a matter of numbers game. It's not, like anyone not doing their job. It's just a matter of, you've got 160 units that have these kind of unique tweaks that you need to go into each one and adjust, as opposed to taking their formulaic approach to how we increase that. Mm-hmm. And the appreciation caps vary pending each individual unit, correct? Are they all 2% or 3% a year,
Yeah, the town has a standardized appreciation,
which is
3%.
3%?
Two.
Well, let's back up first. This is going to back up a little bit further, and this goes back to one of Alita's comments earlier, or Aaron spoke, is legally what's enforceable against the restricted unit is the deed restriction or the covenant itself. Then we have the guidelines, but the guidelines themselves are not directly, at least in Mount Crested View, directly enforceable. My understanding, town of CB has some deed restrictions that specifically mention their design guidelines and compliance, but those do not. So you mentioned, asset checking. So let's use Homestead. Homestead requires your asset limits to maintain those while you use those units. And that's what's enforceable, even if the guidelines say otherwise, or if the guidelines say something that's more restrictive. If the deed restriction doesn't say that, then we can't come back and say, well, the guidelines say this, even though the deed restriction doesn't enforce it. So just one point of clarification there. And then, so tie this to appreciation cap, back to the question. So I believe our guidelines is 2%, as Neal stated, but Homestead deed restriction is 3%. So in that case, what governs is the 3% for Homestead. We can't come back and say, well, our guidelines say 2%, so tough luck. So just know that disconnect, if you will. Yes, and guidelines are guidelines. Yeah.
Yeah, quote unquote, where conflicts exist, the town code prevails, followed by these guidelines, being the housing guidelines. Followed by Gunnison Valley Regional Housing Authority guidelines. Deed restrictions on specific properties may supersede these guidelines as well. That's the verbiage from the housing guidelines, which I guess is
But
like
a
circular.
deed restriction is a contract. And
Yeah,
it is
that
a
makes
restriction
sense.
on the
Yeah.
deed.
Is legally attached to the property.
It's binding.
When I asked my clarification question, it took you away from the presentation. I do have another question, and it takes you farther away from your presentation, if we can address it.
And I'm just giving you some high level thoughts. I do have a thought about the resident that came to you with their concern and how you might want to think about that and to look at policy going forward, knowing this may or may not erupt more, but
And that's actually what I'm
Yeah.
trying to touch on is looking backward, knowing we can't force the hand of an association, what tools we have to provide relief for someone in that situation. And looking in this specific example, the only thing I could think of, and Neal's graphic that he put together kind of made it a little bit more simple for me, in that this is kind of an outlier in all of the information. It seems like simply raising the AMI restriction is the only way of providing relief. You can't make it easier for that person to afford that unit if you're setting them up for success to sell it to somebody who can.
I would tweak that a little bit. And I'll
Okay.
tell you why. So I like in the industry of affordable housing, one of the main tenets that you want to hold at all times is keeping it affordable for the next person, right? And so how do you preserve that unit? And sometimes units become unaffordable and you need to address them. And this may be one of those. There's another kind of philosophical question that you guys will want to ask yourself, and it's whether you're in the business of wealth creation for a single household or in protecting a program and addressing a problem. And so places like Habitat for Humanity, like social service focused church groups that build homes and things like that, they are in the business of wealth creation. That they really curate a homeowner, that homeowner is involved in building the home. They do a lot of education, and that whole process is designed to groom and create a homeowner that they can go forth and improve their lives. And their statistics on success are amazing, like really, really cool. Governments usually don't play in the realm of wealth creation for individuals. Usually we are functioning in the space of providing safe, secure housing that's yours, but not to help you individually create wealth. And there's varieties of deed restrictions. Even in town, we have some that have no appreciation limit, and it'll be really curious to see how they sell. I think there's one at Pitchfork right now that's maybe around $650 on the market with 120% AMI price point. But the market will tell them what they can get for that, versus the ones that are really tied to an appreciation limit. You usually get the price for them because the price is kept down. And so whether your goal is to create wealth for this individual is something to ask yourself. That's a unique approach.
And that's not where I was going with it.
But the idea of if I was under the impression, tell me if this is incorrect, that this person is struggling to make their housing payments currently because the assessment's going up.
Basically, that AMI level doesn't seem to be able to afford that.
Doesn't match.
So
And
changing it for the next person, not
absolutely.
For them, but like allowing them to open the door to more people that can actually afford their.
And I think
Right now, they might not be able to sell it because somebody might say, I can't afford that.
can't do that. And so making that justification and backing in and replacing the restriction is definitely something to look at. That you can see where it sits, like, okay, so your HOA dues are this. Is this an appreciation cap unit? No, so they can get whatever they want to. So that's where the meat on the deal is. Like, what are you enabling this person to get out of it when you then are going to be capping the next person with something? Another way to look at it, and I have not reviewed the deed restriction, I don't know all the details on it, is if it's a current moment of not being able to make your bill, like not being able to make a monthly payment, whether you put a silent second loan that the town steps in, helps buy that found out their mortgage, record a mortgage against the property. And when they sell it, you get your money back. And maybe it's time for this unit to not function this way because it's an HOA that doesn't work right. You take those sales proceeds and put it into your affordable housing fund to do something that does function.
That's what if there's any type of like secondary assistance program, like a second on their mortgage or low interest loan that would work in the same manner, that would cover them for a period of years. Hopefully their income increases so they can better afford it, but they don't have to sell it. And then when they do wish to sell it, then that would be recouped back by the town. And that's kind of an emergency situation, but at least keep someone local, local work in their unit, better to have them sell, and then at the mercy of the market. So
It keeps their housing stable, and you get your money back at the end of it because it's truly a recorded loan. And you just say, all right, this one didn't work out very well. We're gonna fix it with this gap fixed right now. But you're not just infusing house money into one household. Then you can decide when that household gets to the point that they're ready to not live there anymore. You're not unhousing somebody with your policy. That then you can decide, should you just extinguish that deed restriction, pay out what is a reasonable value to the homeowner, and put the balance into your affordable housing program and pursue a different unit somewhere else that may have more protections, might have a healthier HOA, something of that nature.
So that's the mechanism, regardless of the reason. It sounds like it's not about the mortgage, it's about the skyrocketing dues and assessments.
All of this requires really deep investigation. Like, did they secure a bunch of mortgages and are paying a lot of money on something that they didn't do right? Like, I don't know. I don't know what's happening when it's not so. So do your due diligence so that you're not being taken, and that you're aware of what is the financial situation of this household and this unit and this HOA, and then that can put you in a position of how can we help? Where is it appropriate for us to help? And how do those dollars come back to us?
And I think in this situation, part of the issue was they put a lot of money down on the house in the first place, which is why they were able to initially afford it. The payment they were making, and then when it went up further, they had a problem. I think that if we're going to try to fix anything like this, before we go into, deed restriction adjustment or loan, we have to add into the deed restriction that 3% cap on increasing over time, because that they bought that house at what its maximum would have been with a 3% increase, it would have been like half of it. So, nothing, that they did wrong, but all the people that lived in the house for them, they were making a lot of money off of being in affordable housing. And that's what's causing the problem we have with this house now.
No, thank you. Yeah, it's a tough one.
And maybe just to add to your question as well, Roman, it's all cumulative, right? It's your mortgage, it's your insurance, it's your HOA fees. If you assisted with insurance or assisted with HOA fees, I think that's more of a gift scenario in that. But if you put the second mortgage, I would think that would ultimately reduce their mortgage, right? So make it reduce that cumulative number down lower while still providing, while not being a gift or as much of a gift. If you
You're
will.
coming to their rescue.
Yeah.
Like, your money will come out to you.
Right. Yeah.
Maybe, like, I also kind of coming back to insurance costs, I also was surprised by the, insurance cost being so low of a contributor to the HOA breakdown of our deed restricted units that, we provided. Here we talk of, I think we, had you pulled those insurance out?
So, the $16 possible for in 2024, and if I remember correctly, it was just based off of one unit, and we kind of replicated that for all of them. So I think there could be more studies done for the insurance portion of this.
Yeah, because I'm hearing a similar story to and what you shared for people's insurance costs and communities, community HOA insurance costs are just going so high that that's what's, you know, the brunt.
Insurance across the board, your car insurance is going up.
Sure. So like, that being said, I put the numbers that we were looking at in today's package into that summary. So.
That's built into the HOA.
Okay.
The opposite, that maybe the information from your property manager is like,
Okay.
HOA.
That would make
And
sense.
then, so you carry two policies, the HOA insures essentially.
Okay.
Out.
Yeah, I think that's probably
Individual.
Got it.
tied
Thank
to
you.
the HOA and not the individual.
Thanks for that. Claire.
So that would be
Yeah.
kind of standardized across the.
Right, the insurance policy costs would be spread across the units, but then individual insurance cost would fall back on the owner.
And that's kind of, I mean, it's just kind of a snapshot in
Mhm.
time. We all know that, insurance is escalating at a much faster pace than, inflation.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
that was the intent, just to give an example.
Okay,
Same.
you know, maybe something that I've been digging into is like what kind of solutions. Yeah, like understanding the breakdown of our HOA costs and seeing what that we can, yes, sure, maybe we can't, you know, quote unquote, we have no authority to change or modify HOA fees, but if we can provide some assistance or programming to, you know, to act and, you know, resources to help acquire better insurance rates.
Well, and I know that one of the things we kind of talked about is, buyer education and really disclosing to potential purchasers of the restricted units if they're in a mixed income situation unit that, and it's not restricted by any town means or otherwise, that you're looking at potential substantial escalating increases. Can you afford it? And then, is there a feasibility for a assistance program
Right.
with the town?
When I was at Mountain Towns, one person that I connected with was talking about how their organizations, they're at Aspen, their flood premiums for the planet, they actually work with municipalities, and like groups of people to go in on like group buys of insurance, because it might be easy for one insurance company to say, I'm not gonna insure you anymore when you're an individual, but when there's a lot more money on the line, I think maybe they have more leeway and more leverage to negotiate. You know, so like investing, I don't know if you've
It's an insurance pool.
or, yeah, insurance.
That's what we did for our health.
And I've seen that in the real estate space as well. Again, when you look at, you know, the size of the HOAs, then you know, go to look at City South, look at their little HOA. So that would be a difficult one to kind of wrangle in. But whether it's multiple HOAs going together where you've got some scale. I think another really like the idea of programming to help in this space is like, I think there's immense opportunity with Green Deep. And we've really been focusing on energy efficiency and things like that. I have a dream of that growing into a more robust program, recognizing that we, one way or another, hook or by crook, we place these deed restrictions. We've got these units. We're not done touching. Whether it's the cost for compliance and administration or just recognizing that the costs for repair of where construction costs have gone over the past 5 years, that it is difficult for an appreciation capped unit to keep up with minimal maintenance to make sure that these buildings have a shelf life. You know, that they're not wearing down because you can't afford to replace your things. You can't afford to replace your roof. And so Green Deed, like when I think of Green Deed, I think of it beyond sustainability. I think of beyond insulation. I think of like the house that exists is less of an impact on our environment than the house we're going to build. And so let's try to work on preservation with some of that and making sure those programs can support some of this. So we're seeing this play out a little bit on Poverty Gulch, which is right by the town wastewater treatment plants on Butte. So coming to gas or hang left. It's a 10-unit, 3-building project that was, I think the first or second thing we did in the early nineties, and it is wearing down. Windows are shot, the roof is shot, I worry about siding. And these are units that are restricted at 80 and 100% AMI, so those folks are not gaining equity at a 3% appreciation to allow them to tend to all those exterior concerns. And so we can certainly slide windows under green deed, no problem. We can talk about that. The roof doesn't really fit green deed's current role. But the more we offset that with grants, the less those special assessments hit those maximum sale prices. The unit stays affordable, it gets new. It stays affordable. And so we can reimagine these programs in terms of recognizing we have units that are in this space. And so if there's a special assessment coming up, one-off unit in a market rate building that's for a roof, like can Green Deed step in and pay a portion of that roof cost? You know, and it's just recognizing that like it's not a one and done when you do home ownership. Like we're gonna have to keep touching that because it just doesn't function in the market the way other units do. And the labor market continues to function the way it does. Like if you can go work on a 15,000 square foot house on a heater out there, you're probably not going to come and spend your time replacing a boiler on a 1-bedroom condo that has an income restriction. Like that's just more time and paperwork and driving. That's just the labor market. You know?
Try to get a plumber for a small job right now.
Man, shower at someone else's house. Yeah.
What do you? How deep do you get? Because what if you get to an association and they purposely and repeatedly not voted to increase their dues because they want the lowest possible dues, and they know they need paint, they know they're gonna need stuff. Then we're like, hey, we can't afford this. It's like, well, you've been not setting your association up for success for a decade.
Yeah, and so making sure you're not failing to be loud.
Right.
And this is an evolving concept for us. Like we are revisiting our capital improvement policy. We've made some shifts over the past kind of 2 updates to our guidelines. We're doing those annually, recognizing AMIs come out every year from HUD, so something has to be updated. And maybe we'll get to the point that that's the only thing we update, but we're learning something every year. So we keep fine tuning this stuff. But previously people could get value for kind of quality of life improvements, like paving their driveway, putting in built-ins, that kind of stuff. And those are really nice things. Like I'm not saying that they're not valuable, but they don't really extend the life of an affordable housing unit. But replacing a roof when it needs to does, and the furnace and the things on the exterior, insulation, those kind of things do contribute to preserving activity. And so we took our capital improvement plan 2 years ago and flipped it over and said, quality of life stuff is no longer eligible. So sorry. But when you're going to replace your furnace, give us a call because that is eligible to be tacked on to your maximum value. And so we have to look through it through a lot of different lenses. I don't think there's one way to say, like, to manage the deterioration of units, particularly units in mixed use buildings, with strict AMI limits. That we've got to look at it from a lot of different angles and know those units that have lower AMI limits are going to need more help. That people can't access that rate. When your unit's worth $200,000, like you can't mortgage off that rate. It's very clear the bank is going to look at it and see that it can't be sold for more than that. So, okay.
So I'm hearing, let them know what they're going to get access to ahead of time.
I think so, and I think also being really proactive, trying to educate our HOAs. When you're in that mixed income market rate and affordable, that's just going to be hard. You know, but if you have an entirely affordable project, you can definitely be more involved and try to keep them engaged. And we're happy to help deliver these kinds of retreats. That's why we're trying to be kind of that support. And where we've had units that have been totally not managed well by the previous owner. And they also haven't gone after a bunch of capital improvements to up their price. We've allowed them to exceed the limits to make sure that the units are going to function properly. So kind of a roundabout, like it's a hard, like very much want to make sure that people are being responsible for their units and taking care of it. But also recognizing when you're in an HOA, you don't often get the votes for people to decide, yeah, we should do appropriate maintenance. And people don't like giving money to sit in a reserve fund. You know, whether it's because they don't trust the HOA, or they'd rather just get a special assessment and manage their money themselves, or they simply don't have the budget for it. And that comes back to the education thing, you know, like, it's totally clear to me that a lot of the problems that we have are that we have not consistently had any type of home buyer education. Do you get to know your restriction education? Like, how do you handle capital improvements? What does it mean to be a homeowner? Like, those are base things. You know, and then people walk into it with the idea that you'll just be able to make it work because you stayed long enough and you're local, or your realtor told you could, or the value's gotta go up more than that. You know, like there's a lot of baggage with these units that is not clear to the public.
Yeah, you know, HOA organizations, like, they're not educated as businesses, and yet they're operating as one.
Very much so.
And therefore, like, there is nothing to say that they are doing it the most efficient, effective way, you know, with the mindset of even like the foundation of this being, you know, I even consider that sometimes it might even go the other way around, where I wonder if some HOAs are taking advantage of the, like, the variety of homeowners, and the sense of recognizing that, hey, say, you know, a couple owners are, you know, second homeowners and maybe have more income to be able to contribute, and therefore are raising the HOA fees because they can, because they know that a handful of owners can cover it, and are offsetting it with their own contributions, like, but we'll shovel the snow, and so we won't actually like cover, you know, charge ourselves for that cost, or but we'll do the property management. So, and that in itself, I mean, I'm in a situation where I think, yeah, like sometimes that rolls down to the renter as well. Even if the second homeowner is renting, they might just like, even if
Absolutely.
the HOA might think that a second homeowner can cover that cost, they might just transfer that on to the renter.
Usually, so.
Yeah.
And the costs continue to increase, right? Like, we know this, like, and getting someone to shelter your roof, like, these are buildings often that you can't just do stuff yourself. So, and I'm not advocating that we're just building a bunch of single family homes. We know that's a challenge too, but there are some constructs associated with density with housing where you eliminate the availability of your own swag. So it gets a little bit more difficult.
Which you can't recoup.
Which you can't recoup, but it gets done.
And then another byproduct of the scenario you mentioned, Roman, that we've seen at least once, where, you know, it's an all restricted HOA, but they don't maintain reserves, is getting, for a buyer to buy a unit, getting financing in that scenario is,
Super hard.
yeah.
That's usually the mechanism of change for an HOA. They have a couple of people trying to sell and they say, hey, we can't sell. And so then they figure out, oh, we got to change this because I might want to sell my place someday.
Yeah.
And the rules do start happening, you know, when you get a home inspection for your lender and they're like, call this a roof. You know, like, they're not stoked about seeing that too. And then that owner is going to have to sit back and figure out, how am I going to rally this group of other 9 people to realize we have to self-assess and make this happen? Is that also a complaint to the town about maintenance, like that the building's starting to deteriorate, that it's such a complicated social and legal structure that you throw deed restrictions in there and it gets harder. And it doesn't mean like, this is the way we have to do it, right? Like, we can't keep building single family homes. We don't have the land and the money for it. We need density. That just is what it is. And so it's that we just have to keep an eye on these things going forward and figure out, how do we manage them? And know that we've made some mistakes with our deed restrictions and which units we've agreed to or not agreed to. Like, some of them don't play out well. We know that. Like, we got the same problem. Yeah.
Can I ask, have you seen any successful outcomes from an assistance program? Where it's a loan, or some other type of financial assistance to tide them over till they sell the unit, or however that
I haven't worked on one of those, but I've talked with people that do. You know, I work among
amongst housing directors across kind of the ski town, Colorado Association of Ski Towns. And so we all talk about like that this is a wave coming too. You know, and so whether you've done a few one-offs, we all know this is a big problem that is just waiting to knock on our door. That all those 1970s and 80 condos that were built with some interesting practices, that just not maintaining or whatever, like they're coming home to please me with the restrictions. Yeah, and so how do we address that? We're seeing the green deed approach play out in Poverty Gulch right now. We're watching it play out in Red Lady Estates, which is the trailer parks behind parks. All 10 of those are deed restricted. And so those programs are working. It's slow, it's tedious, you know. And that's part of what the challenge of the kind of housing that we have, right? Like we've got this, rarely do you get the 22 units. You're like, oh, thank God there's 22, they're all kind of all the same. You know, like, thank God, you know, like those are, you know, they're going to be managed. It's the scattered things. It's the old ones that didn't turn out as well as you thought, or just with practices that we didn't know would come our way over time.
Yeah, to some of our scenarios, just you might already know this is, you know, in our construction boom in 2005, 2006, you know, part of developers meeting their community housing obligations was purchasing existing units and putting deed restrictions on. And so that's how, at least in some of our scenarios, we got in these mixed units, mixed ownership, restriction, non-restricted scenario in the first place. And when those buildings were in their infancy, you know, these were looking ahead, and ongoing maintenance or replacement wasn't really induced, even at the time, or significantly less, wasn't at the forefront. We didn't have the same experience that we have now with the deed restrictions. That's how you get a deed restriction with a capped or an uncapped piece to it. So that's just some history here on how did some of this happen? In some cases, a developer came in and said, I'm going to purchase a unit in X condo, deed restricted, and that's how I'm getting my how I'm meeting my housing requirements. And then now here we are 25, 30 years later. Picking up the pieces is not the right word, but yeah, dealing with it.
Yeah, and learning from
learning from it is probably, yeah.
We are all inventing our housing programs where we like this is not like a HUD product or some type of federal program. Like you look at Telluride, Mexican Steamboat, us, like everybody's inventing this stuff from our own awareness and like political reality and workforce needs, like backing up 30 years. Like we know rent control has existed in New York for a long time, in San Francisco for a long time. Those are giant municipalities that built those programs, and we are just kind of like creating this stuff as we go. I joke sometimes we're like shooting our way through housing, and you're like, how does this work? And now we can look back, and we're like, oh, we learned a lot actually, and so how do we fix those errors? You know, like how do we address the one-offs? And one of the things we're doing is every time a unit sells, that we take those main attributes of that deed restriction, unless they're totally broken, and we require, like the buyer is qualified under the existing, but then at closing, they sign the new deed restriction. So you just got rid of one more bad deed restriction. You know, and so it's not a change to the market that the seller is choosing from. Still working out their documents. But then at closing, it's a whole new world. This is how we operate. It's still limited up this income restriction. Oh, it does have an appreciation cap. And so you have to play with some of this stuff to make sure it's market palatable. But you do have, like, you are the benefactor of these deed restrictions.
So at closing, then the town or the county or the affordable housing can change the deed.
We do, yes. We have that written into our guidelines, and we've replaced, since we started doing it in the middle of last year, I think we've replaced 7 or 8, which sounds silly. Like I know, but it's like every one of those that's on the current form that references our guidelines is under our current policy.
Do you had, I know it's a small number, but of those, did you have any buyers that backed out because of the change in deed restriction?
No, not at all. And we're not changing, you know, like the kind of main ingredients are what's your income limits, you know, like is there a town employee priority and what's the appreciation cap? You know, and it's like, we're all good about preserving those. You know, we've actually stepped into the line of title, purchased and fixed things and added appreciation caps where they should have been, but miraculously were not recorded for.
Yeah, well, I think it's worth pointing out too, that we're only in the 81 to 120 AMI units of the 18 in that category. 5 are in Pitchfork, which have their own set of deed restricted, but it's all affordable for the most part. 9 are in Homestead. The other 3, 2 are in 3 Seasons, and 1 is the Mountain Sunrise. So it's only, on one hand, really, number of units that we, compared to having 20% here. So,
But even like across the other AMI restriction levels, I'd love to, I anticipate that actual verbiage that's in the deed restriction areas.
majority are no AMI.
Right, right. So that's what I'm saying is that even if there is no AMI percent, there's, like the employment guidelines and.
But that's the whole basis of your
Right.
community housing program is
What
to
I'm
house
getting at,
local.
totally. What I'm getting at is, like, I love the idea of consistency and making sure that, for example, like with that, say if we have a few buckets of deed restrictions that really are aligned with current community needs and that are aligned with what we want to actually enforce, then I feel like it wouldn't be part of our lives.
Well, I think that the 3 they're in mixed market deed restricted. 2 units in a 30 plus units in 3 Seasons, 20 plus units in Mountain Sunrise. So they're really outlined. It's just how much effort you want to put into rectifying those situations. Almost be a reality.
That's a good point. Now that we've done this assessment of and have identified 3, is it worse or is it appropriate for us to look at these 3 and see what relief can be provided?
Town owns one of them. 3 Seasons.
We don't have to answer them in this moment, but like knowing our hesitation before, like, well, we don't want to just start changing things because it might affect all these other units. Like,
No, I think it's for the conversation. And I think one of the levers was mentioned is like we could step in.
ghost loan or whatever.
Well, there's the loan, there's also us buying the unit and making the changes and then returning it to the market. So yeah, those are levers. That
So maybe we can
have a conversation.
talk about that before our retreat.
One other piece that I wanted to raise is I love the fact that you're looking at community, and that really does, like, I wanted to say, I know when like Fred Dubuque was developing their climate action plan, one of the things that came out of it was, that like requiring assessments, because those are the times you can really identify the improvements that maybe aren't waiting until catastrophic failure. So, that's another lever that especially with, any potential plans to develop our own climate action plan and what we want to.
Am I doing an energy assessment?
Energy is very great, yes. Because, for example, so that was one of the key actions that came out of the precedent climate action plan was, like we're requiring energy assessments for both like commercial and residential properties as a means to, to highlight areas that, for improvement. I'm just thinking through, like, I feel like otherwise, like, HOAs are gonna wait until catastrophic failure. And.
Depends on the HOA.
Yeah. But if they're already having to pay such high fees, just to stay afloat, then, like, I feel like people are already really pinched for cost. I anticipate, especially, I know some that are very, that are really pinched for cost and therefore, like investing in massive improvements. I'm trying to find ways to make the cost more environmental instead of all of this. And thinking about perhaps green, energy assessments or green deed improvements being that means to raise revenue. And so if we could encourage that through like, requiring, energy assessments or home assessments.
At the sale of units, we are now requiring the seller commission an inspection.
Okay.
Because we don't wanna give you the maximum sales price if you run this thing into the ground. When you're looking at a 3% appreciation gap. Like, let's make sure if you're proving to us that you maintain this building deserves the maximum sale price. And have kind of a two-part reaction to that, like life safety things just have to be fixed before closing. Either you fix them all before closing and you get the maximum sale price, or you escrow for 150% of those costs for the buyer to make those corrections. And whatever's left after that, you get that money back. And it's hard to trigger routine, particularly in an HOA when you've got a voting body. But now that our deed restricted owners are seeing this coming, they're like, oh, wait a minute. You've got two identical houses right next to each other. One person has done nothing and is a chronic smoker. The other person is fastidious. We're going to give them maximum resale price for both of them. Like, that's not reasonable. And so that's why we plugged a pre-sale inspection in. And certainly being able to access green deed requires that you do an energy assessment so they can say, this is what would work best for you. Like, your refrigerator is the culprit. Let's do something.
We're all gonna do the insurance crisis is potentially coming for all of us, deed restricted, free market or whatever. So that's the big problem for all of us.
We're pushing at the kind of Colorado Association of Ski Towns level and within our kind of lobbying space there for the idea of affordable housing insurance tools. And so where we always run into trouble is that the legislators are like, sweet, every low-income housing tax project is eligible. And we're like, hold up. Like, we have been creating these units for decades and they don't fit under any of your definitions. Don't leave us out. Like, let us in there. So we've dealt with that through all of the proper stuff. That all of the stuff that we've built largely doesn't count in their eyes. Really insulting. But we're working.
Is it your experience that the wildfire risk is what's actually causing these increasing for us?
I think it's natural hazard risk across the board. And so the way I've seen it is really the hurricane impact waves in the southern part of the country kind of triggered this, but we're seeing it everywhere. And so wildfire is affecting things. The fire in Brookfield was a huge part of it. It's like all of that is triggering insurance companies to leave the Colorado market. And then those that remain just jack up their prices.
So there's a lot of building, hardening that can be done around wildfires. And some certification organizations around that. Are we seeing that insurance companies care about those things being done or not?
Some do and some don't. I can't recall if it's certified or what the terminology is for a insurer that abides by the state rules, and they don't have to operate here. They can just come in and sell policies, and if they go broke, too bad. Versus if you do one that's certified, I'll find out what the real word is, and is part of the state's kind of certification program, that the state then backs that insurance policy, so if they go bankrupt, the state steps in insurance policy.
Yeah, bro, I think I mentioned it to you, Bruce. I talked to someone in Idaho and they have the most state-of-the-art wildfire defense system you've ever seen. Sprinklers, misters, cistern, redundant pumps, and like everything. Their insurance company didn't care because they were pulling out completely. They weren't looking at anything on individual basis. They're just saying, we're out of the state of Idaho. We don't want to play. What about Colorado? Yeah, I mean, that's the problem. And that's the problem.
And I think, you know, when I've seen like one of the original gangsters of housing, because this one really vested, she's like gonna retire and it's gonna kill me. But one of like, when she talks about the ways that she finds levers to help keep things affordable, ended up being things like infrastructure improvements, getting fire hydrants closer to houses.
Yep.
Because your insurance company wants to know what is that distance, you know, and if it's too much, ooh, it's gonna be more if it's over here. You know, and so like there are really tangible and kind of basic things that we can do to improve affordability. And making sure that we're writing deed restrictions that lenders don't hate. Because if they don't like them, the interest rates goes up, or they simply don't like them, they don't have good competition, you know, so. Like we can look at it through a lot of different ways. It's hard, like the insurance industry is obviously ripe for reforms. You know, like how much we get to push that would be interesting. And one of the ways we addressed that side was we own the 14 units that is built in our renting workforce. They're insured under our social policy. And so when I compared, I was using comps from Anthracite when I was looking at that development. And our insurance premiums through SURSA are 60% of what Anthracite pays as a private entity. You know, that's, and government owning the housing is not the solution. It's not all of it, but that's the one that we work around.
And why do we have to, like, I like the idea of, you know, thing for our deed restrictions, but why can't we open that up to HOAs? You know, like open up like a municipal, like, you know, like an HOA pool for municipalities to be able to get insurance, or maybe not even HOAs, just like homeowners.
I think it's all of it's worth exploring. I don't have the expertise to talk about like a jurisdictional, but I know that affordable housing owners who are working in the low income housing tax credit space or HUD spaces where like you've got Section 8 tenants who do not have extra income, insurance costs are killing you. And so they are super motivated to figure out that solution. And they also own thousands of units, you know, and so they've got attorneys at their beck and call to figure things out. And that's a whole line of business for them. You know, but whether those changes can infiltrate into a space that our deed restricted owners can access.
This is a little bit of a pivot, but we've had high level conversations about hiring an in-house housing person, or doing some of it in-house versus not in-house. I'm not asking you to make this decision for us as much as I am asking for you to give us questions we should be asking ourselves of what we should be deciding to do in-house.
Yeah, I thought your question the other night in the listening session was spot on. Like
About the
what's in-house
compliance thing?
versus what's out of house. Are you more comfortable sending your income and tax return information to a stranger or someone in the community? Like those are all really, I think, important questions to ask yourself in terms of how do you feel your program should be ran. I think it's just important to know, and you guys learned this really quickly, that like as soon as we leave compliance, like the workload goes through the roof. And so someone needs to coordinate that. Our council has very much decided that they want a local face as part of this. And over my years of doing this, I've heard both sides. Like, I am not sending my tax returns to somebody I know. But I hear more people saying, boy, do I appreciate I can go to their office and see their face. Whether it's going through the income qualification process, whether it's dealing with compliance, like that people seem to appreciate, not unreasonably, that we're small towns and having a human that you can go talk to is kind of part of that. So I think deciding how comfortable you are with that, or if you just really don't want to allocate staff resources, you're going to pay more to a consultant, as we know. There aren't many people that do this work. I've been scouring now for 4 months when I was seeing writing on the wall, and have found two, and I've interviewed them both. We're probably going to do one more round of interviews with my team to make a decision on them. There, like the people that are out there that do housing qualifications and compliance do it for housing tax credits and HUD. They operate within a federal program. They know the rules. There's trainings for it all across the country. It's not easy, but you can get trained in it. Like we've got, as we talked about, these really kind of disparate portfolios of deed restrictions and ages and how well they've been enforced, and that it's a little messier. And so they don't get to go to some training at a housing conference to learn how to do ours. They have to just come and dive in. And so like that's been one of the big things that we're realizing is there's just not many people in that space that are ready to do this work. But a lot of the other communities that have, a lot of deed restricted housing programs grew the administrative side of this at the same time. And we never really did. Like we never created a dedicated funding source for housing authority to be the safety net under these things. And it kind of got us to where we are now. Now that we've got all these units and no administrative body. So it's just know that there isn't like a plentiful supply of them out there. I think it's important to go into it with. Decide how you feel about what role staff plays and what a local face means to you. I said to believe it when we were talking about this a little bit ago, but it's like we're in survival mode right now. I mean, like over the course of just a couple months, we've learned that we don't have administrative support on a sizable portfolio of homes. And so like just figuring out how to make sure people can sell their houses is like my first concern. That somebody picks up a phone and some raises their hand and say, like, I need to move this time. Like, who's going to do that work? And so set your sights and be really thoughtful about how big you think you need to do it to begin with. Because we're also learning how to do it. Like we saw, like this first round was a learning experience. Now that effort is kind of in-house, and so give yourself time as you're creating this too. And maybe the first step is just like, how do you handle qualifications? Because that's what you're going to need when someone sells their house. And we're looking at it from a really similar lens of like baby steps and a lot of community engagement because we don't have the trust of the community right now. And that makes this even harder. And so when you talk to consultants, like, how do you engage with people? Like, what's your ethos? Like, are you housing cops? Or are you just wanting to connect and move people back to compliance? Like, because those are two different approaches. And the way you empower them will determine how they behave, or maybe they come with a pack set of how they operate.
I appreciate that perspective. How different is the skill set from the management side of things versus the front end side, which is, development of certain mixes of properties or going after money or developing programs.
Different skill sets.
So
yeah, very much so. You're just asking a lot of an individual to know how to structure financing, interview and hire architects, get things through an entitlement process, write a deed restriction that works, find money for it, and then lease it up or sell it. Mm-hmm. Versus somebody that does compliance and administration. That's helpful. You're going to look through this application, this form of application, over and over and over and over. You might tweak it a little bit as you go. You might be like, wow, it's too, but it's like, it's a, there are different personality types and different skill sets. Developers, whether you're actually taking the financial risk or not. Like you put out fires all day long and you've got to know how to deal with all the different players, the architects, the engineers, the lawyers, the general contractors, like everybody. In compliance, you've got your lawyer in your pocket, and you might check in with maybe your housing task force in terms of, wow, this one's a little bit unique, how do you want me to kind of thing. It's just they're totally separate things. And there's a lovely rule book that tells you largely how to handle compliance.
That rule book.
A predictable rule. But I don't know, I'm assuming you've shared, and I don't want to be speaking out of school, out of turn. Like, we are totally interested in partnering if you guys are. Like, we know that it's, this is a lot of work. And we are planning to add a staff member to be that publicly facing person with the idea of that whichever of the consulting firms we choose will be the capacity building force behind them. That those two entities have been doing deed restriction administration and qualification for years. And so they can help be someone who's this front person, as long as obviously too, being behind this person who's going to be publicly facing. And then we'll learn, like, okay, let's take this slow. We know we need to respond to all the sales. We then need to decide how we deal with proactive versus reactive compliance. Proactive is what went down pretty far. We're just going to do this neighborhood. Reactive is like, dude, we know they don't work in here anymore. Like, we have the intel, we got that.
We know you.
Nobody got it.
How many total units does the town?
We have 300, not including Anthracite and Middle Point, because those are under the tax credit program. And so that doesn't interface with us really in any type of operating way. We're more of an advocate on both of those properties for our community.
A little bit different scale.
Yeah,
About
different
3 or 4.
scale. And so we have 300, half of those are just the accessory dwelling units that have really super light restriction that the unit needs to be rented long-term to someone who's not in ownership. The other 150 are total mixed batches.
And just to understand when you said, because you were are hiring public facing, and so you said they're gonna be managing compliance with the help of the consulting firm, but also like sales and potentially rental placement as
We
well.
have an in-house property manager, and so town owns 14 employee units. We have the Brady, which has 6, which are seasonal. We prioritize town employees in the summer, and then local workers. And we often end up with full-time year-round employees living there too, because there's not enough housing. And then we have the 14 Paradise Park units that are just wrapping up at the end of this year with John Stott. Those are rented under income and asset restrictions with local workforce requirements. All of those units are with our partner. The consultant will do the income and asset qualifications for Paradise Park. But all the other stuff just stays with the property manager. The housing specialist, which is the catch-all term for anything someone touches housing, will be kind of the public face of administration. And so we're talking about bringing sales in-house, so people are not paying 6% to sell a deed restricted unit. And most of ours, that's 2 years of appreciation. Yeah, you lose to sell your place, like brutal. And it's not complicated. Like, we tell you how much you can sell it for, right? This doesn't require a whole lot of expertise, but like definitely making sure that people have the support and representation they need to read a contract. Like, we cannot give legal advice. And so we're looking at those kind of twists, but we're rolling that out slow. Like all of this is based on what did we hear through the listening session? What are we capable of doing ourselves? How do we keep fine tuning and getting that feedback to see if we're reaching the public the way that we're wanting to? How do we design education programs so we don't have as many misfires? So slow and low, I feel like we obviously got capacity restrictions of how many staffers can we hire. Got some like immediate administrative needs that need to be tended to when someone sells a unit. And then we need to get to the point to respond and to go back.
I almost feel like it would behoove us to have sort of like a bulleted list of like the place that we want with pursuit. Yeah, I have to. So, yeah, we're all on the same page, so that we're not like losing all of this insight and have a yes, maybe we don't have all the answers right here and now, but I'd love to at least have an idea of how we plan to proceed from here. What we've discussed today.
And back to the housing retreat.
Well,
Yeah, I think it's kind of
It's already built in.
somewhat on there, but I mean, the takeaways I see are, and I think the reality of it is there's maybe 3 units. It would be one-offs, And the town owns one of them, so, I mean, that is a decision council certainly
Yeah.
have the opportunity to discuss.
How about 2 units?
The 2 units in 3 seasons, and they're the highest HOA fees on the mountain. Town's paying, so, what the status on how we want to continue to live with that. So, yeah, that, I mean, that's reality, just how much effort, time and expenses. that you'll circumstance.
I feel like I'm missing something, because just because those are the only ones that are AMI restricted, that we're named, like, we have so many other districts, I mean, 55, not 300, but you know, that are not AMI restricted, that still have deep restrictions that are all over the place.
Let me clarify a little
Yeah.
better. Those are the 3 that are in mixed restricted market development. So they're the ones that are at the mercy of HOA fees
Got it.
escalating through the roof. The other units in the town aren't, because in the 81 to 120, that's pitchfork.
Mhm.
And possible significant assessments.
That's why, that's already,
That's already been done.
well, that's why they're so high right now, and they've had significant increase over the last few years.
One of the challenges that I've seen is with upward mobility, with somebody outgrowing their big family, or somebody becomes not compliant, of AMI, let's just say. Trying to figure out how to move them to the next level is something that I've been challenged with. And with the compliance one, I kind of thought, like, let's just say it's an AMI issue. They're given notice that they're no longer compliant. There's a window in which for them to sell their unit, but then they go to the front of the line or something to that next tier. And I don't know how that idea lands.
That's hard. I mean, we struggle with housing mobility across for everybody, market, like locals and market rate housing, as well as anything in the district. Like one of the main solutions, like we need more units. You know what I mean? It's like, oh yeah. We don't income restrict after income qualification, right? Because we want our local workers to be able to advance their career. We want them to pursue additional education. Like, they qualified when they got there, they're still meeting the local workforce requirements. I don't know if your restrictions limit ownership of other property, I would assume, and make it for primary residence. Like, I feel like those are 3 really good ingredients right there. And so, like, we don't want to suppress your income. There are very few housing programs that say thou shalt not make more than this much ever. Certain federal programs, really weird ones. And so in homeownership, you almost never see that. And so that would eliminate your compliance thing, but if that's something you feel is important to keep in place, then you're gonna run into that compliance issue a lot, and people will struggle because there's nowhere for them to go. Yeah.
And I want to clarify one of the things that I was highlighting earlier. I found the exact verbiage, and we actually say in our housing guidelines, which what I'm trying to get to the bottom of is I want our deed restrictions to really capture the market that we're trying to accommodate. And, you know, I really like the point that you brought up of, are we building wealth or, you know, wealth creation for individuals, or are we in the business of maintaining housing stock? Because they're not one and the same, but maybe there's a way that we can build, you know, our deed restrictions, if the deed restriction really is going to be the like key element that we are going to stand behind. And I'd love our deed restrictions to be consistent as much as possible, like with what CB is doing in terms of, you know, actually implementing, say, like a common framework of deed restriction upon sales one at a time. So for example, like looking at our housing guidelines, in thinking that maybe that's where we were trying to capture intent before, we said employment is the only eligibility factor that will be tested on an ongoing basis after a household is qualified for and purchase a deed restricted unit. Not, the other elements of the housing, guidelines, like owning other residential dwellings, not owning more than one vacant property, housing assets in terms of median income. So yeah, I see whether we have like our housing guidelines that are our standard that we want to point to, and that's going to be our defining factor, or whether that's in our deed restrictions. I think we need to decide what we're going to be advocating for most, whether it is the accommodation of wealth creation or need to.
But, sorry, I don't mean to interrupt.
Yeah.
Chapter 22, which is community housing standards, which is the regulatory arm of the town code, very explicit that for deed restricted units, any community housing required in this article, this is inclusionary zoning, 15%.
Right.
For rental or ownership and occupancy by eligible households with incomes below 120%. That's our target. So that's codified in our town code.
But otherwise, the deed restriction is always what controls. Always.
Sure. In that case, then I would love for our deed restrictions, that for us to get behind our deed restrictions and make sure that they actually, like that we are advocating for what we want to encourage. And if it's like, if we don't want to limit somebody from increasing their income, then making sure that the deed restriction, aligning. And yes, we only have a handful of, income restrictions, but, or if it's, like property ownership.
What's the one that you want to change? It seems like there's one that you think is.
I would love for our deed restrictions to be common across at least in maybe a few different buckets.
And they are, right? Like you gotta work in the valley. You can't own any other property. There's like a couple of things that are common to almost all of them. So what's the thing that you want to be common to all of them that isn't? I'm really trying hard to understand what you're looking for.
Asset testing was one I heard. Increasing your wealth. Homestead, as an example, says you have to remain in compliance with the deed restriction throughout your ownership of it. One of the restrictions is your net worth.
And that's in the deed restriction that will be.
To qualify, you have to have meet net worth up to 200%, I believe. And then it says you have to maintain that.
You have to maintain that.
Over. Yes. Yeah, you can't exceed that. If you exceed that, you're outside of compliance. So maybe one of the things that I think I'm hearing you say, full disclosure, I live in Homestead, is to remove, and so to determine that you're still in compliance with that, you have to test that net worth testing, right? But I'm going to use one of those, just you individually. I'm not saying this is the council in general. Remove that net worth once you have purchased, you have to qualify for that once you purchase it, but over time, if your life situation changes and you progress through your career, that's not ultimately held against you. That's one of the things I heard.
Sure.
I'm trying to speak.
That's common practice.
And it sounds like that's the intent of the housing guidelines that we established. Intended in the guidelines not to check back in about anything else other than.
It's the deed restriction that governs. So if the deed restriction says you have to
Yes.
comply with it going forward, then that's what.
We enforce that though, so we don't have to say that
Right.
we're going to enforce that.
But that might be one that you could easily change without much controversy.
It's a contract with the owner. And so unless you're making it more restrictive, usually the owners are pretty like stoked about the change.
Yeah, we can just tell them, like, yeah.
We're not going to enforce it. You could probably ask us.
I think the challenge we have to Leah's point is most of our deed restrictions preceded our deed restrictions.
And
Or our guidelines. Most of our deed restrictions preceded our guidelines.
like I'll get you in just a second, like so many things, I think some of these things were put in place to keep people from gaming the system. So if you have to qualify initially, but you're never gonna get checked in on again, then you can structure your purchase and your assets to look a certain way for a very short period of time so that you get in the door. And then once you're in the door, you can get the big inheritance from your family or the piece of so all that stuff. So
It's true, and you
it's
can
stuff that
always,
cuts both ways every time.
and you try to design policy, everything's a bell curve in life, right? Like, there are gonna be a handful of people that don't qualify that should, and a handful of people that do qualify that shouldn't, but are gonna hit it down the middle of the road. Also recognizing we are not forensic accountants. Like, we are going to take your tax returns at face value because that's what you gave to the government, or like, okay, that number. And then like lawsuits happen too, and then you have a windfall. And so like life is messy, and now we're stepping into people's houses and their income. Like, this is the weirdest place for a government to play. Like, it's super uncomfortable. Like, it's super hard to do well. Like, and knowing that some people are going to game the system, and it's like Aspen has, the Aspen Pitkin Housing Authority, I think they have 10 times the number of deed restrictions that we do. They have like 3,400. And they've been doing this for a long time. Their real estate transfer tax churns out cash. Costs $1 million to build a unit in town then. So like all of that ratchet goes up together. The way they're looking at new deed restrictions, like they've already got 3,400 variety packed stuff. That looking forward, they're like, we just need local workers. We don't care about the rest of it. Like, we don't care if you come in with gazillions of dollars. Are you working here full time? Right on your their loss of the workforce and fitting the square peg in the right hole and all of these things. And when I talked to their finance director, they're like, only rental housing, managing deed restricted ownership is absolutely okay. Yeah, we know that those homes are super important to our community. Like if we just said we're only doing rental and walked away, like my tariffs would be popped. And so like there's like in every jurisdiction is aiming for a different thing. The county has decided rental is their jam. Like, that's what they're going to focus on. But it's a messy place to be, and you're going to have some people.
One last point, as it relates to our target constituents at 120% AMI or less, and we've talked about this a little bit in the past. For resort communities, our AMI range is still relevant because what Chaffaa and HUD sets for Gunnison County is not relative to what is up here. Very affluent, very expensive.
I think I believe, the AMI question is up for a lot of discussion right now. Previously, the calculation that HUD made had ties into inflation indices. And so in the past 4 years, it's just shot through the roof. It's not representing. So I have heard that HUD is changing the way they're looking at it coming in. Will that correct us enough for how out of line it was for us to be? I think the one last thing I'd like to leave with you is like this concept of income restrictions and then rent and home price restrictions. You can't kind of do one without the other. Like when you look at a program, we'll use a rental for an example. If you only restrict the renter's income, but you don't restrict the landlord's rent, you have a predatory rent space. We watched that play out in one of our developments. The owner is charging 125% AMI rents with 80% income rents. And like they out-lawyered town staff when this all came into being many years ago. But it's the same thing when you have an income limit on a deed restricted unit without a price cap. Like that homeowner is never going to be the landlord that's trying to extract that value. So they gotta go together. If you're gonna do income limits, you gotta put those.
And 119% AMI, yeah. Only the person who's exactly at one point.
That's what we.
So how do you provide housing to you desperately need more than?
Mineral points is probably.
Yeah, so that's.
And sometimes they make too much, you know, and that's, I think, another one of the problems. is that
What is mineral point housing?
So, oh, that's Whetstone. That's the Whetstone. Mineral Point is across the street from the gas cafe, the one where the siding goes on. Yeah. That's looking, I'm saying summer, you know, they're saying construction will be done end of March, but we, as you know, it's built on a remediated landfill, state is heavily involved, and so I'm just saying let's shoot for when some starts. Whetstone, I think, is wanting to start leasing out some of their first units next year with completion of 20.
And is Whetstone or rentals? No.
Yeah, and I think 25% of those units are market rate. So of the 252.
Thank you so much, Aaron.
You're welcome.
Really
We're
appreciate
totally off topic.
No, really appreciate your, I think it's.
Like housing, I'm sorry.
The
housing was the topic, so you're all good.
So, again, thank you so much, really appreciate it.
You're welcome.
And then, before I forget, Neal, could you express thanks to Mountain Home Management for
Yeah.
giving us the
Oh,
information?
this
It's
is really super
really
cooperative.
very nice.
Thank
Yeah,
Thank you.
how much we appreciate that.
Can we get confirmation on a date for the housing retreats? Everybody here.
February 5th.
February fifth is what we had, but we didn't have everybody here. Wow.
Oh, that was consensus from the council last time, but sure.
And my question, are we doing it here? Do you want to do it at the elevation, at the elevation? Huh?
Somewhere with a beach.
Well, yeah. Can we use our housing fund? For that?
in.
Can we use the housing fund for that? Council retreat?
Not this year.
So, do you guys want to just do it here, or would you like to do it maybe over at the boardroom, at the elevation, or Mountaineer Square?
Good question.
I've been inside not Trackers, the Al Johnson boardroom. It's a nicer place because it's got windows versus the elevation you're in. Yeah, I just have to deal with fail, so that's my only hesitation for that. And that's true, it doesn't cost us money to do it here.
Unless someone has an objection, let's just do it.
Okay, we'll do it here.
Yeah.
No, you're welcome. And, you know, with a couple of minutes left, you do have an updated agenda for the retreat. I don't know if anyone hopefully has the opportunity to do it. If you have any questions, you can. But with this,
Sounds great.
I think we can get there for a little bit more than.